So with that, it is now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Bryan Flannigan with the Building Decarbonization Alliance to deliver our opening keynote, Decarbonization Challenge and the Role of Heat Pumps. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. So great to be here. This is my third time opening a symposium for HRAI, and I really want to thank HRAI and Martin Limas for the invitation, and thank you all for taking the time to be here with us. I spent a beautiful weekend in the area, and every time I come back to Halifax, I can't believe how much the city is really improving, and seeing the infrastructure investments that are being made here is quite astounding. It's just a lovely place to spend some time, and I'm happy to be here this morning with you. My job this morning is pretty straightforward. I'm here to kind of set the stage for the day and talk about why heat pumps matter more than ever, talk about what's changing in our industry, and try to make connections to what matters for your business. Now, I'll start by introducing the Building Decarbonization Alliance, because we're kind of new on the scene here, and talk a little bit about the focus of our work. And then I want to zoom way out and look at the really big picture, how global economies are electrifying, how building electrification ties directly to economic renewal, and how we compare here in Canada to international trends, and what that means for you here in Atlantic Canada. I'll walk through the narratives that we need to sharpen on affordability, consumer choice, and system readiness. And finally, I'll try to connect it all back to today's agenda and why your role in this transition is so critical. Now, 30 minutes is a heck of a long time to talk in front of people first thing in the morning. I hope you're all well caffeinated. Bear with me, and we'll get right into it. All right, so the Building Decarbonization Alliance is a coalition of over 300 organizations across the building ecosystem. We're manufacturers, contractors like you, utilities, governments, program leaders, and innovators all across the building ecosystem. And the idea here is to bring everybody under one tent so that we can roll up our sleeves and solve problems together. We really share one focus, and that's moving the needle on building decarbonization in Canada. We're practical, we're nonpartisan, and we're really solution-oriented. Our job is really clear. We have to find the friction points, technical, financial, policy, or workforce, and work together to try to break them down. And we do that by working with the sector, co-developing practical solutions that make the industry stronger, more competitive, and ready for the scale that's going to be coming in the next couple of decades. Now, this isn't an academic exercise. It's about building an affordable, resilient, low-carbon energy system and making sure Canadian companies and workers lead that transformation for our buildings. Now, here's the question for the day as I see it. How do we make our buildings transition to heat pumps at speed in a way that grows our industry and at the same time keeps our economy really competitive? To answer that, I've organized this talk around the 4 pillars of our work here at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. Now, these aren't abstract ideas. They're how we connect the big picture to the international momentum, Canada's national choices, to what it means on the ground for contractors, manufacturers, and program leaders like you. These pillars are viewing buildings as engines of economic renewal, setting electrification as the standard for comfort and competitiveness, aligning institutions and planning mandates, and mobilizing retrofit capital with scale and with certainty. These are the 4 levers connecting the big picture to your business realities as I see it. And I'll talk about why I think that's the case as we go through here this morning. So let's start with the first pillar, buildings as engines of economic renewal. We'll unpack this by zooming way out, as I mentioned, to really long-term trends internationally, working back through that international energy context to Canada's national position, and then finally zooming back down into what it looks like here in Atlantic Canada. Shall we? All right. Now, before I talk about buildings, I want to invite you to consider some global trends that are shaping how we use energy overall, how technology innovation is evolving past what we're in now, which is the digital age. An organization called Ember, which is a global think tank, just published a piece last week that kind of blew our socks off, and I thought it was very, very relevant for our conversation today. So I thought I'd just begin by sharing a couple of their slides to set the table on an idea that I think is gaining momentum and that might help reframe some of our old debates around decarbonization. That idea, as Ember suggests, is that we're now moving past the so-called digital age and entering a new electrotech age. On the slide here, we see how we may have moved from the Industrial Revolution through steam and rail and steel and oil through digital and now onto an electrotech powered by renewable energy and fully electrified living. This new era will shape the last half of this century, and countries are effectively now in a new global race to harness its full potential. In this new era of electrification and digital, it's reshaping our energy supply and demand kind of as we speak. It's just happening sort of in slow motion, so it's hard to see. Electric and electronic innovation and expansion are currently converging and rapidly becoming the default way we consume, power our lives, and drive our economies. Now, Ember suggests that the advances and dramatic cost reductions in renewable energy generation, storage, transmission, and in electric end uses are inevitably going to reshape our economies. When we look closely at global trends, we can see this happening practically in our timescales. Clean power generation is, in fact, winning the race. In 2024, more than 2/3 of all new global power sector investments went to renewable energy, overwhelmingly solar and wind. The International Energy Agency calls this a new normal, where fossil generation is already the minority of new capacity. And electrification is reshaping our demand. The fastest growth in electricity use right now is coming from EVs, heat pumps, and data centers. These aren't like radical technologies, these aren't the fringe at all. These are now the new mainstream drivers of energy demand in advanced economies all around the world. For Canada, the message is pretty clear. If we rely on our fossil fuel economy and old resource economies as we have in the past, which have served us very, very well, we risk being buyers and not builders of the new clean economy. Going to zoom in a little bit and look specifically at buildings. We can see that this is already starting to happen in a way that's visible. Heat pump sales are growing fast. In the US, supportive policy and stable prices drove a 15% jump last year. Heat pumps outsold gas furnaces by 30%, which is a record. In Europe, over 25 million units were sold in 2023, but interestingly, sales dropped 21% in 2024. You can see it, the question mark on that graph there, I called it out for you. They dropped in 2024 when energy markets really started getting people freaked out about affordability and governments pulled back on programs and incentives. So the lesson's kind of simple, really. When prices and policies really align, heat pumps scale pretty quickly. When they don't, the markets stall and confidence erodes in manufacturers, installers, and customers alike. The other graph there shows that what the IEA has presented, that money is flowing already in this shift as described by Ember. In 2024, more than 2/3 of power investments went toward renewals. That's everything except for the red kind of bars on the graph there. And in buildings, and the brown peaks at the top there are energy efficiency and electrification. Next door in the US, despite the change in administration, the Inflation Reduction Act is still delivering record incentives, and this is where the money is flowing. Countries are also locking in targets and timetables. The UK is aiming for 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028, and the European Union is now legislating fossil boiler phase-outs in new builds. And these types of signals direct capital and supply chains to where the momentum is the strongest. And while we have some good examples in Canada, for sure, we're doing a few of the right things, globally, others are simply moving faster, and they're capturing innovation, they're building their local supply chains, and they're gaining a competitive edge. So while we have all the ingredients to lead, we're just not really putting them together nationally into a cohesive strategy where energy and buildings are concerned. Now, on the positive side of the ledger, Ottawa has announced the Major Projects Office to fast-track nation-building projects, which we think will include major electricity interconnect and transmission projects, which is going to be really required and is going to be amazing. And they've also launched Build Canada Homes, which is gearing up to double housing supply with a $13 billion commitment. Now, that's 13 with a B, that's not bad. So these are really big opportunities to hardwire electrification and resilience into the next wave of building stock. We really hope that those investments are net zero or net zero ready in terms of the types of projects that are going to be supported, and we're working to make that happen with lots of our partners. So it really means embedding resilience, electrification, and Canadian supply chains into what's going to be the biggest public housing and infrastructure effort in decades. So if you have words to say to folks, let's get it right, let's build these new buildings right, and not have to redo them later. The reality check, though, is a little bit starker. Our emissions flatlined in 2024 at 694 megatons, according to the latest information just released last week from the Canadian Climate Institute. And that leaves us pretty far off our 2030 target. In fact, for the first time, the Canadian Climate Institute is suggesting we're just not going to make it to 2030 now with the way that our policies are going. And at the same time, the investment gap that we have between what we need to put into our buildings nationally and what we're doing is pretty glaring. Corporate Knights Climate Dollars analysis shows that we need about $60 billion a year to decarbonize buildings, transportation, and power, but we're really only currently investing a fraction of that. On top of that, policy instability erodes confidence, and you can see this when you're talking to potential customers. Just last week, the federal government confirmed that the Greener Homes Loan Program is closing applications. So that was a $40K zero-interest loan, which I think was really helping move the needle for folks that needed to borrow that money. And, you know, online there's a bit of a backlash going, come on, like, what are we doing? We got to keep these programs running, right? We know that that creates hesitation among homeowners and headaches for contractors. You're trying to plan your work and you're trying to keep a pipeline going, and it's hard to do that when the programs are on and off like that. Still, like there are some really bright spots that we can learn from across the country. Quebec heat pump sales continue to grow really quickly. BC's regulations are steering new homes toward electrification. So these are proof points that the technology and the approach really does work. The demand is there and the industry is really ready, but the policy just needs to be more consistent. Right here in Atlantic Canada, you're showing the country what's possible with vision. As I was talking with colleagues here at Efficiency One, Nova Scotia's Wind West initiative is pitched as a nation-building energy export strategy, and it signals the need for abundant, affordable, clean energy that's completely aligned with this electrified future that I was talking about. So that's amazing. More than 27,000 heat pumps were installed in Nova Scotia in 2024. I don't know if my colleagues here can fact check that, but it's a lot. And we know that in PEI, the programs are oversubscribed. People really find them popular. And, you know, you folks here in the room are proving that this works. You're creating jobs. You're building resilience into a region that has its share of climate issues with the summer season that you've had. It's quite remarkable. And this, when we talk about engines of economic renewal, this is what it looks like. It looks like aligning policies and making investments where it's going to matter in the future. Still, and this isn't a criticism, this is the way that the energy system works. There's a tension between building out the grid and making sure that it's affordable, right? And we need to work through those debates in practical ways. We are going to have to invest in the electricity system, make it grow, make it resilient, reliable, and at the same time, we need to watch our backs and not make electricity unaffordable for folks. So this is a tightrope that's hard to walk. It's easy to stand on the sidelines and criticize, but it's really hard to work it through in practice, and those are some of the things that we're trying to do. So if pillar number one is about making buildings an engine of economic renewal, then pillar number two is really about changing the narrative here at home. Right now, too many Canadians see electrification as some kind of a niche choice, expensive, unfamiliar, or maybe too complicated, and I really think that's the wrong story. we need to make electrification the standard, the default option for households, for businesses, and for policymakers. And so why are we pushing for electrification? Not only because it's cleaner, it's just better. For households, heat pumps deliver reliable, comfortable, clean heating in winter, and increasingly important is cooling in the summer. That means year-round comfort and resilience. If you need to close up the house because of wildfires, or when a heat wave shows up, you've got yourself covered and your family covered, and that's really important. For businesses, we think that electrification reduces exposure to what's going to be long-term price increases and volatility. And we think that building valuations increase when you have a building that's really well built and that has modern practices at play. But a little bit more work is required to really drive that case home. For Canada overall, this builds industrial competitiveness in a world where every major economy is electrifying. So I think our task is really to flip the script from a conversation away from, is this possible, to why wouldn't you? We need to make electrification the obvious, affordable, and competitive choice. And today that conversation often starts with affordability. Now, there's a really persistent myth that electrification and net zero homes are too expensive, but the evidence doesn't really support this. I'd like to offer you 3 perspectives on this: the cost of heating with different fuels and technologies across the country, the cost of new homes and multi-residential builds, and a concept called the total household energy wallet. Now, when it comes to heating bills, location really matters. Gas and electricity prices vary widely across Canada, and that really does shape how people see and perceive the use of heat pumps. Our chart shows it pretty clearly. The green and yellow bars are heat pumps and hybrids, are often inside the blue box, which is gas heating, meaning lower cost than gas. And across the country, heat pumps are always cheaper than oil, propane, or resistant heat, which are fuels that are still common right here in Atlantic Canada. The challenge really is that consumers can't run these numbers themselves very easily. Your gas is sold in cubic meters, your electricity in kilowatt hours, a heat pump has a coefficient of performance. I try to run the calculation, I get confused, right? And so even our team making this chart, it's not obvious how to make this graph, believe it or don't. So the challenge is that we need to give people help to cut through this and see the savings. And it's all too easy to just tell people, electricity prices are high, you can't afford to heat with a heat pump. It's kind of not true. So the bottom line is that heat pumps can be the affordable choice, but it depends on where you are. I don't give the same speech in Alberta and Saskatchewan. They see it differently, and they should. The prices don't, it doesn't pencil out. Not yet, anyway, right? So this is really important. This is probably as good a time as any to tell you that you have a special tool in your delegates bag. If you look in the orange bag, there's a tool to help educate homeowners. It looks like this. The Building Decarbonization Alliance and Plumbing and HVAC Magazine have created a heat pump educational flyer designed to use as a leave behind when you're talking to homeowners. It's not branded. It's a third-party resource that just explains the types of heat pumps and why they're a smart upgrade for your customers. Cool thing is, you can download it as is. If you want to, you can talk to Mark at Plumbing and HVAC Magazine, and you can order a bunch of copies for yourselves, and you can brand it for yourselves as well. You can download it and have it customized to put your own logo on it. So we think these kinds of things will help. It's all about kind of educating the consumer on where we land here with heat pumps. Now, another affordability concern we hear is we can't meet environmental goals because it'll drive up housing costs. And this is particularly important when we talk about that Build Canada Homes initiative. The evidence seems to say otherwise. A survey of 70 BC developers recently done by our partners at the Zero Emission Innovation Center shows it clearly on this graph. Very few developers see environmental requirements as a major cost driver. If you look at their top concerns, it's development charges, interest charges, zoning and bylaw requirements. Environmental issues are at the bottom, so building a home well with resilience and in a net zero capacity doesn't seem to fuss these folks at all, really. And yet we always hear, it's too expensive, it's too expensive. Work by the Smart Prosperity Institute also backs this up. The narrative that net zero adds unaffordable cost doesn't really add up under scrutiny. Now, are net zero homes affordable for everyone? Unfortunately, no. But saying that we can't build them because they're too expensive for anyone is just wrong. And affordability isn't just about heating, it's the whole household energy wallet: heating, cooling, hot water, and transportation. Our colleagues at another transition accelerator initiative called Electrifying Canada modeled that energy wallet in a net zero 2050. The result is that even if electricity prices rise by 80% because we're building out the grid, most households still come out even or ahead once they electrify their homes and their cars. And in Atlantic Canada, the picture is even stronger. Look at where all the blue bars are coming in relative to the status quo of red bars. That's because electricity is relatively cheaper here and fossil fuels are relatively more expensive. So the household energy wallet is much cheaper across the board when families switch to heat pumps and EVs. Now, not everyone benefits equally. There are provinces there where the red bars are still sunken beneath the blue. And especially if you're not switching your EV out and saving gasoline, then you may also need additional support. And that's why incentive programs and support still really matter. But when we consider heating bills, new construction, and the overall energy spend, the story to me is really emerging and getting much more clear. Electrification will make life more affordable for most households over time, and in Atlantic Canada, the benefits are particularly strong. Now, we have to realize first cost is still a thing. Installing this equipment is still expensive. Getting an EV, getting home charging equipment is not obvious for most, and that's why those incentive programs really matter to kickstart things and keep them going. Now, Pillar 3 is about aligning institutions and planning mandates. So why isn't electrification scaling the way we need it to? One important reason is that the rules of the game don't line up with the transition we're supposed to be making. So let's take a little bit more of a close look at where policy misalignment is holding us back. So in my view, the biggest drag on electrification in Canada isn't technology, it's this misaligned policy and regulation. We have a few areas where this is evident. The first is with weakening federal regulation. We see that in recent federal decisions around the consumer carbon price and the cancellation of the Greener Homes grant and loan programs. These kind of tend to undercut momentum and give us that sense that programs are on again and off again, which we really hope they don't do, but they seem to keep doing over and over. The second is with utilities and regulators. The Canadian Climate Institute's Heat Exchange report shows that most utilities and regulators are not really required to plan for electrification, believe it or don't. As a result, we're still expanding the gas networks and underinvesting in distribution grids. The third is around a concept called area-based planning. Our jurisdictional scan confirms that only a handful of jurisdictions worldwide required integrated planning that takes into account the gas system, the electricity system, and the heating needs of the community that's there. And without clear plans, I think we're working at counter purposes in that regard. And the fourth, the result of it at the end of the day is that gas appears artificially cheap, and we risk saddling our taxpayers and ratepayers with the stranded asset costs down the road when we do finally wean ourselves off and get fully electrified. So this policy environment overall really creates uncertainty for consumers, and it stalls markets for installers, and it creates missed investment opportunities. The BDA and our partners have a few ideas about how to fix this. We need to align codes and mandates. We need to level the regulatory playing field between electricity and gas. We need to plan for and unlock smarter infrastructure and investments in the grid. And if we get the rules right, we'll make lives easier for all of you here in the room, we'll lower costs for consumers, and we'll create the conditions where the market can really grow at speed and with scale. Now, if I can be king for a day, aside from getting you all a fresh round of coffee here as I'm winding things down, the one thing that I'd really do to accelerate the heat pump market would be to phase out one-way air conditioners. Cooling demand in Canada is exploding. Hot summers, wildfire smoke, and air quality concerns are pushing households to buy more air conditioners than ever before. But every AC that gets installed without heat pump functionality is really a missed opportunity for emission cuts and for customer savings and to get your business used to selling heat pumps. So I think the fix is pretty simple. We need to make heat pumps the standard pathway and not be selling one-way air conditioners anymore. Programs should treat heat pumps as the default option for cooling upgrades, and codes and standards should ideally close the market for pure AC installs in new buildings and retrofits. This would make the sales conversation a lot easier, and consumers would realize that they can run their heat pumps in the shoulder seasons and save themselves some money. So we would really accelerate adoption if we could remove one of these kind of choice barriers that are in the market. I'm kind of counting down on time. The last pillar is around mobilizing capital. I'll kind of skip through a couple of things here. But suffice it to say, I mean, at the end of the day, we need probably to 3x or 4x our investments in buildings. Various organizations across the country are calling for somewhere between $20 billion and $60 billion to fully electrify transportation and buildings, as I mentioned before. And right now, we're only investing really a fraction of that. And so at the Building Decarbonization Alliance, we're working on a few things to help bring the private sector into those public funding programs to really leverage the money that we have. Hopefully, we won't have to have programs oversubscribed if we can do that. And we're working on building some tools that will help to create financing products with the banking and finance institutions. So I'll just skip through these and bring this to a close. So I hope what you've heard this morning is that, you know, the energy transition is well underway. This is a global phenomenon that's taking place, kind of with or without us. Atlantic Canada is kind of killing it. You guys are leading the way in a lot of ways with the way that your programs are aligned. Of course, there are still challenges, but the vision that's being painted looks really good, and the programs that you have here are fantastic. And, you know, if we can really unlock this, the opportunities for people in the room on a national scale are calculated in the tens of billions of dollars in the coming years. So the opportunity to grow your businesses are really there if only we can unlock some of these things and align the policy. And, you know, obviously the people that are best positioned to help do that are right here in the room. We're going to be talking about it all day. You'll hear from industry leaders on the state of heat pump technology today, manufacturers and innovators that are shaping what gets installed in homes and businesses. We'll have lots of breakout sessions. We'll talk about the workforce challenges. And it's really quite an exciting agenda. I'm happy to be part of it. And thanks again for inviting me. This industry is really at the center of Canada's energy transition. So let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep building that momentum. And thank you very much for your time and attention.